morning, everyone, and welcome to The Other Side of Midnight, the program that, theoretically anyway, kind of covers sometimes some of the things that Art covers, but from another perspective, and boy, have we got a situation this morning. I did not know that Jay Weidner and Stanton Friedman had been booked, so I'm tuning into Art, kind of like I do when I'm setting up for this show, and lo and behold, there was this really interesting discussion with both of the guys getting so much wrong because they weren't there, and I was. So what I had planned to do tonight was to have open lines, and that is really fortuitous because I get a chance to answer if you're interested, and of course we're going to tell by who calls and what they want to talk about, whether you'd like the other side of some of the things that Jay Weidner and Stanton Friedman and Art were discussing. Because there were a lot of things that were wrong, and I don't think it's by any malicious intent or whatever. I think it's just because this is evidence of how fleeting history really can be. I mean, we're literally within a generation of human beings walking in Project Apollo on the moon. And we have such fascinatingly divergent opinions from the millennials, from folks my age, from everybody in between as to A, what happened, and B, did it happen? And I just have some interesting data, just happen to have some data on this and perspective. So as we go through the morning this morning, from time to time, if you're interested, we will make some comments. Let me give out, so people can get ready, let me give out numbers that we're taking calls on this morning. Our phone number. If you're on Skype, or even if you're not on Skype and you call me on this number, it will come through on Skype. So it's 505-796-8802. That's 505-796-8802. Or if you are on Skype or on a digital device that actually has Skype programmed as an app, you can call and you can talk to us with really amazing quality from halfway around the world. We're going to be doing a show on Friday morning, and one of our guests is going to be calling us from Hong Kong, and it's going to sound just like, it was around the corner, or maybe even here in the studio. So the other Skype name is Enterprise Mission. So it's 505-796-8802 and Enterprise Mission. And someone is not supposed to be calling this line, so we're not going to have them do that. I just was fascinated by some of the perspectives that Jay was covering, because I'm finding that there may be more overlap of some of the events around Apollo that he and I have looked at separately than initially I might have thought, or maybe he might have thought. I believe Apollo happened. I believe Apollo happened because the Chinese, in 2013, independently, almost a half century later, with a totally contrary political system to ours, and with totally updated technology in the form of automation, CCD cameras, et cetera, they landed 2 robots on the moon, and they have basically proven everything that we have claimed vis-a-vis the Apollo program. I mean, my main question has always been, if we never landed on the moon, if the Apollo program was a fake, if we spent $20 billion creating the most extraordinary Potemkin village in the history of humankind, then how did those images, those film images of stunning ancient artifacts all over the moon, get back to Earth on film? Not electronically sent like the lunar orbiters, took photographs on film in lunar orbit. Then they scanned them with a photo multiplier system that turned basically the lights and darks and the negatives that were developed on board by an automated process. They turned the scanning into a radio signal, sent it back to Earth, reconstructed the images, so it was not really television, it was more like a fax machine, a very long-distance high-tech fax. This was in the mid-'60s. And on those images, you can see the same kinds of artifacts on the surface of the moon that the astronauts later took on the Hasselblad images from the surface of the moon. I was intrigued that Jay says that, well, everything that Hogan's looking at from orbit is accurate, but the stuff that he's looking at from the surface is not. Well, when the Chinese landed their Jade Rabbit and their Chang 3 lander on the surface of the moon, they basically verified in every detail the details, the stunning crystalline glass-like prismatic ruins that we found on the Apollo imagery, including, first-hand samples that I got from people like Ken Johnston, a half-century before. Now, we found the Chinese data on official Chinese government and military websites, including the website of the People's Republican Army they're in Beijing. I mean, they're the ones really running the Chinese space program. So the fact that they put uncensored, unadulterated imagery from the Chang 3 mission on the official websites, and all you have to do is download it and turn up the brightness, and there above the horizon, 10, 15 miles away, are these stunning glass ruins. And if you do some little things in Photoshop, tweaking with contrast and gamma and brightness and noise and all that, you can bring out some astonishing details that geometrically and photometrically look identical to the stuff that was shot by the astronauts on the moon a half-century ago. Now, is this just a claim? No, you can look side by side. If you go to enterprisemission.com, which is our flagship website, the one where all the research into this extraordinary idea that we are not the first to explore the solar system and that we are looking at the ancient archives and ruins and detritus of a previous civilization all throughout the solar system. If you go to enterprisemission.com and you just scroll down and click on the banner, what did the Chinese really find on the moon? That will take you to a very elaborate, very long, very detailed, very documented paper, which I wrote a couple years ago. And further down in the paper, I present side by side not only the imagery from one Apollo mission, I compare 4 or 5 of the Apollo missions and the imagery they brought back, the Hasselblad photography, with what the Chinese have given us via television and CCD imaging technology, etc., etc. And when you look at them side by side, they're identical. Now, how could the Chinese have sent a robotic mission to the moon 50 years after Apollo, confirming the most controversial and insane hidden aspects of the Apollo program, that the U.S. found and verified the ruins of an ancient civilization on our nearest satellite and then never kind of bothered to tell anybody? I mean, the Chinese obviously are putting on the record that NASA is lying about one major thing, and that is what is on the moon. And they're just leaving it out there all over the web for anybody who hears programs like this to go and download. And the links to the original Chinese government web sources are in the paper that I just described over on enterprisemission.com. You can go and download everything and check it out yourself, put it in Photoshop, put it in PaintShop, put it in some program, do the comparisons. The Chinese have verified the most outrageous aspects of Apollo without saying a word. And furthermore, if that all is true, then Jay's contention that all of the photographs from all the Apollo missions is shot in a studio and faked needs to be examined very specifically on a case-by-case-by-case basis. I'll give you one really important clue here. When I got into the space business back at the museum in Springfield back in the 1960s, one of the lions of the to-come space age was a space artist named Chesley Bonstell, who lived in California and in the 40s and 50s wrote with other authors, books with extraordinary illustrations done by Chesley to illustrate what the solar system and the moon and space exploration would look like from the 40s forward when we really got into it. And his work appeared in Look magazine, Life magazine. There was a whole series of works in Collier's. These were these big 4-color glossy print magazines that riveted America. That was their reading material. The mainstream reading material was not, evening television, or it wasn't cable, and it certainly wasn't the internet. It was magazines that had stories and nonfiction and news, and each of these major conglomerates published their glossy, and it was Bonstell who illustrated brilliantly, stunningly, what space exploration would be in the out years with the works of the actual authoring of Wernher von Braun, with Bonstell doing the illustrations on several books that basically took Americans on this futuristic journey, while Walt Disney was hiring the same von Braun to do television shows promoting to the American people what space exploration and men into space and going to the moon and Mars would someday look like. There was a huge thrust to get people in the United States acclimated to the idea of reaching for the stars, reaching beyond the atmosphere, going into the solar system, conquering space. That was the big term, to conquer outer space. In those illustrations, particularly in the Disney work, and to some extent in Chesley's work, if you look at the mountains on the moon, they're sharp and craggy and angular and like spires and weathered and eroded and very dramatic and dynamic shapes, which is totally, totally different from the reality of the mountains on the moon, which are all rounded by billions of years of exposure to micrometeorite, rain and constant bombardment, and basic abrasion. So you've got this real contrast between an artist visioning what landing on the moon would be like and what landing on the moon actually was or would have been like. What's interesting is that in Apollo, in the actual photography and in the films and the television and all that, the mountains of the moon are absolutely nicely rounded by erosion. They're not craggy. They're not like the Alps. They don't look dramatic and dynamic like, the Rockies or something at sunset. They look like rounded stuff which has been beaten to hell by a lot of years of micrometeorite bombardment. In other words, if Apollo imagery was faked, if it was just pulled out of somewhere to provide in imagination missions to the moon for people following Apollo, how did they manage to get the surface characteristics of the moon absolutely correct? In other words, if you're not there, how do you know what's there? And you could say, oh, well, they had unmanned imagery to basically work from. Well, maybe. The fact is that you can't fake the artifacts on the surface imagery because there's no way that NASA would possibly put ancient alien ruins in fake pictures. It makes no sense at all. So the fact that we've been able to tease out of this archive of imagery, originally with negatives and working with people like Steve Troy, who was on the show the other night, and talked about working with the NASA archives people for decades with negatives and making prints and enlarging them and scanning them and looking at them. And I've taken a team of people into the National Space Science Data Center. We spent 2 days there. We looked at the archives. We looked at lots of negatives. We looked at what was there and what was not there. We compared notes with what we were able to achieve on our enhancements compared to what the originals contained, negatives. There's a very large, very impressive database of data which says we went to the moon and then we took lots and lots of pictures, and it's the imagery, it's the representation of the going where we're having this major controversy. Because my contention is if the photographs we're seeing are not, at least in part, real, and we can argue image by image by image, then how do we get images, stunning images, correlative images, for a Chinese mission a half century later that shows ancient artifacts that should not be there under any circumstances, and certainly not put there by people trying to fake images from a fake Apollo mission to the moon. Just makes no sense. So, with that, do I have anything else I need to get to before we start the show? No, I guess not. If Jay wants to call in, I would love to continue the conversation that he had with Art and with Stanton. And if he doesn't, then we will go to the phones and we will see who is out there. Damien?
Hi. How are you doing, Richard?
Hi there. I'm fine. What do you want? What do you want to talk about tonight or this morning? I keep saying night because I look outside these gorgeous windows at those amazing mountains, and it's dark. So I kind of think of it as night, but it's really the other side. So what can we do for you?
Well, basically, this subject has something to do with what we've been talking about and what the last two people on Art show were talking about, just by proxy. Remember a few years ago you went on the Project Camelot and you were interviewed?
Of course.
Yes. And I remember that in extraneous detail, very well, no, we're doing, I'm just kidding. You were going to talk about the three groups that were fighting for conquest of these projects. And you said they were the Nazis and the magicians. But you never got a chance to talk about the magicians. Who are they? And what was their aspect to it? And I'd love to listen to what that might be about, because I had no idea what the magicians were, because it never got on that recording. So maybe perhaps if you'd like to go into some detail, I can listen to it.
No, wait. I'm a little confused. I've discussed the whole magical, symbolic, ritual aspect of NASA extensively, both on Coast. I've touched on it somewhat on this show. I've written major books on it. I've talked about it extensively in Dark Mission with Barra. I'm not quite sure why you say I haven't talked about what the magician's role was.
Oh, what I meant when I was watching that interview with Project Camelot.
Look, interviews can vary all over the place. You get to some things, you don't get to other things. You know, it depends on what the interviewer is asking, and I guess Carrie was not as intrigued with that as she was with some other things.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering who they were, and if...
Well, it's not a secret. You know, you go back to JPL, you go to the Oredo Temple, the Temple of the Golden Dawn. You go to people like, what's his name, Crowley, Aleister Crowley, who was a major figure in magic and symbolist and ritual circles in the early parts of the 20th century. And then his mantle kind of fell on a young engineer, a rocket engineer at JPL named Jack Parsons. And there are people who obviously are still alive who know that Parsons conducted extensive ritualistic and you might even say satanic ceremonies in homage to his work in rockets and trying to bring on a new eon, a new age. I mean, they did all kinds of ceremonies. There was a movie many, many decades later called Eyes Wide Shut, which starred Tom Cruise, which you may or may not have seen.
Very familiar with it.
And that particular movie happened to have been done by a guy named what? Stanley Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick, right.
So, look, there's part of Jay's approach, Jay's story, which I believe is accurate. But the idea that the imagery and all the Apollo missions were faked and that nobody went there in Apollo and the astronauts themselves are telling us lies. No, they're telling us the truths that were fed to them because, as we also document in Dark Mission, I have evidence, and I've assembled it in that book, that each of the astronauts had their minds kind of tinkered with.
Right. I remember that.
Now, the other thing which really strikes me is where Jay was describing, a few hours ago, the news conference when the Apollo astronauts were in Houston, I guess it was after the quarantine. That's the one he's talking about, where these guys had lived 21 days in a house trailer because we were afraid, or NASA was afraid, or somebody in the government was afraid they would bring back maybe pathogenic organisms from the moon. So better to be safe than sorry, and they put them in quarantine for 21 days. Now, 21 days is a lifetime if you're hypnotically reprogramming people not to remember what they saw. So when you have a press conference with the guys sitting in front of the press and you say they look like they're zombies, and I think Jay described Armstrong as looking at the desk during the whole press conference, that to me is evidence in support of the fact that these missions were not singular. They were not left by themselves to evolve under their own, the public forces that normally you'd think would swirl around these things. Well, they were incredibly managed, and these guys obviously were not themselves.
Well, let me ask about that real quick, actually, then. The press conference that you're talking about, now I've seen some still photographs. Okay, I was born in 1977, so I don't go as far back as, being able to watch it live on TV. So the press conference, I've seen some still shots where they were in the quarantine unit,
right,
and they were smiling and everything. Are we talking about the press conference?
No. That's when they were helicoptered, from the landing craft, from the command module. They were plucked out of the ocean by the frogmen. They were transported by helicopter to the aircraft carrier. I think it was the Hornet. Nixon was on the aircraft carrier waiting to greet them. They went into quarantine. They went into that aluminum. There's a certain model of that RV that is very well known. I forget what it is off the top of my head. And then eventually, the president's standing there. There's one mic in front of the president. Somebody pulls the drapes open on this window in the back of this aluminum RV, and you see the three astronauts from Apollo, Collins and Armstrong and Aldrin, in their blue flight suits, kind of awkwardly bending down or crouching in front of that window to greet the President of the United States and, of course, the world press, which were standing behind him trying to photograph with TV cameras and everything that was going on. That tableau looked normal. It's later. It's at after 21 days, they were flown back from the aircraft carrier to Houston. They were put in the Lunar Receiving Lab. They were tended in isolation for 21 days. Then they were allowed out to rejoin everybody else, and they had a press conference. And it's that press conference that Jay says they look like, warmed over toast. They did not look like they were high-fiving. They didn't look happy. They didn't look like they'd done the most amazing thing at all. And I'm saying it's because, big pause, their minds had been tampered with to prevent us from knowing what they really found on the moon.
Well, let me pose another possibility. I mean, anyone that's been put into solitary confinement for that long is going to come out slightly disoriented. So perhaps maybe they were just saying, hi, yeah, we're out in the open again.
Look, given the peak experience, I mean, can you imagine all the stuff that any explorers have to go through? We've had explorers living in packing crates in the Antarctic. We've had guys row canoes across oceans. If you're a real explorer, believe me, living in that trailer for 21 days was cushy. They had meals, they had laundry, they had servants, they had everything they could want, including communications. They could see their families. They just couldn't touch anybody because of the quarantine. But it was not like living in a dungeon. So no, that doesn't explain it. In fact, they should have been happy to be released from that artificial environment.
That's true.
No, Jay has a point, and I think the point goes to what has been done to these heroes to make them forget. I mean, the admission by Mitchell to art, and remember, I was part of that debate. The fact that he could not remember what it felt like to walk on the moon, which has got to be the peak experience for any human being, astronaut notwithstanding, just makes no sense unless there's an unknown factor which has to do with their memories were tampered with.
Well, next time Art decides to have a discussion or debate with those two, I really think that he should try to bring you on.
Well, I think he was thinking that he would surprise me by doing this so that we might have some kind of an interesting segue. So I need to find out if Jay has checked his mail and is answering me. So far, he has not answered me, so maybe he's just too tired. Let me say goodnight to you.
All right. Well, it's been real quick. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for taking my call.
My pleasure. And we're going to talk to Michael. Where are you calling from, Mike?
I'm calling from Virginia. Good morning, Richard.
Oh, my
God.
From
Belgab.
It's really, really late back there.
Yeah, it's about 3:26 a.m.
So what do you want to do? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'd like to continue on the last caller's topic where you claimed that the Apollo astronauts may have been brainwashed.
Well, remember, we run...
Allegedly, perhaps.
We are exploring the possibilities, and what I did in Dark Mission is I assembled the evidence. It's pretty powerful when an astronaut says he cannot remember the peak experience of his life. I mean, don't you find that kind of really bizarre?
It is kind of bizarre. I feel like if I would have been on the moon, I would have remembered every second of it.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all been through experiences much less exciting or exhilarating or in public focus than that, and we remember every detail. It's like, for instance, from my age, it's where were you when Kennedy was killed?
Right.
I remember the wood, the smells, the way the sun, it was late afternoon when we found out, I'd taken a long bus ride to meet somebody, and so I was not even at home or at school. I was in another city. And all of that comes flooding back as soon as I think Kennedy assassination. The idea that you're an astronaut, and you see, it wasn't just Mitchell. It was, in one way or another, I discovered when we did the book, it was all of them. And the astronauts had various workarounds that they developed to kind of not have to answer the embarrassing question, what did it feel like? Because they couldn't remember what it felt like. So they fell back on mission timelines, geology traverses, experiments they were going to be doing.
Right.
In other words, a script, but the emotional connection was no longer there. That, to me, is a huge red flag, that there's something so bizarre going on around Apollo and what those guys experienced and saw and brought home, that they, in fact, are now, in essence, not accurate reporters because...
And that's what's interesting to me.
They were tinkered with.
And this is kind of what I wanted to get at. If they were brainwashed or whatever happened to them, possibly to make them remember this momentous occasion, right, being on the moon. I mean, it's a huge event. Why were they sent at all?
Oh, that's a damn good question.
Right? Because if we're just going to make them so that they don't remember what happened on the moon, why not send a robot or some such,
Well, because you needed the intelligence of human beings. Robots don't exist and didn't exist in this time frame. I also think that this tells us that the exotic technologies that people like Paul LaViolette and others have talked about were much less production capable than we may have been led to believe. In other words, it was really, really, really iffy technology. So von Braun chose to use rockets, and there may or may not have been a real space drive assist, but if there was, I think it was limited to the lunar module. I think it was limited in power. I think it was limited in the ways it could be used, which is why it was not used or capable of being used to rescue the Apollo 13 crew, because their consumables and their timelines and all that kind of worked out very Newtonian. It doesn't look like anything unusual in terms of unusual rockets or propulsion technologies or whatever affected Apollo 13, other than a major catastrophe that almost killed the astronauts. So there's a huge number of puzzles to be solved here. And you can't take any one piece of evidence. It has to be it has to be all the evidence in toto. And that's why when I saw that the Chinese were giving us, it was like, hooray, hooray, because they have vindicated 50 years of the assertion by us that Apollo happened, and the big secret was what it found.
That's the question, right? What was it that they were doing up there? And also, how did they know that they were going to find these things, right?
Well, that's
whatever it was that they found.
I'd like to get some other calls in here. We have a break coming up, so we will answer that on a future program. You will call back, of course, and we will have that conversation.
All right. Good morning.
Good night. Okay, let us take a small break here, and when we come back, we will continue, if you want to grapple with this particular puzzle. And if you don't want to grapple with this puzzle, if you want to talk about something else, by all means, feel totally free. And we are back. This is The Other Side of Midnight, and we're discussing tonight the other side of Art Show with Jay Weidner and Stanton Friedman, because they kind of had a party, and I feel that I should have been invited just because I know stuff that those guys don't know. It's really to me, it's so fascinating how even a few years, in terms of an event that someone, let's say me, knows really, really well, the larger culture has forgotten so many specific details that it's even uncertain as to whether there was live television coming back that night. I mean, Stanton talked about, radio transmission. No, it was actual television. And I knew Stan LeBar and the other guys at Westinghouse who worked on the camera that was used to actually send the data home of the astronauts cavorting on the moon. Well, let's continue this now with Scott. I don't know where Scott is. Scott, where are you?
Hi, Richard. Wait a minute. Let me turn down my thing here.
Yes, please turn down your device, everyone, when we connect. Otherwise, you'll have horrible delays.
Okay. I'm at my house in beautiful San Diego, California.
Oh, must be a nice night in San Diego.
Oh, it's lovely. It's lovely. I'm telling you, man, I was not really greatly familiar with your work and your history, but these past couple of weeks have opened up new horizons for me. I am woefully ignorant in terms of science and math, which is why I appreciate you and your guests making up for that deficit. I called in also on Art Show to speak with Jay and with Stanton. I'm fascinated by the ideas and the theories regarding the possible faking of the footage of the landing on the moon. Mm-hmm. I freely admit that there's way more that we don't understand than we do understand, and there's always going to be questions, which is why programs like yours and Art's are such a valuable resource.
Well, I'm glad that you think we're a resource, but how about a question?
Okay. Well, the question is, wouldn't it take more in terms of abilities to fake something than to actually do it? Or am I missing something in the equation?
No, I see. Just from a practical perspective, it's really hard to carry out big engineering efforts. And the more the engineering effort is being examined by as many people as examined Apollo, the folks in the industry, if there were these weird discrepancies, I mean, for instance, I don't know whether Jay is saying that we basically faked the Saturn V, that Saturn V's didn't exist, that we went there with anti-gravity or electrogravitic technology and the Saturn V went nowhere near the moon. That means that we spent billions and billions and billions and employed hundreds of thousands of people, because about 400,000 people were employed during the peak of Apollo, to basically create what? Now, he said that some of what they created actually went into the real, if secret, program. But that also gets iffy because now you have tracking. Now you have people that are in positions of seeing things that don't make sense, that don't match with the public story. In other words, if you are creating a huge mega conspiracy on this scale, I just have the feeling it will fall apart at some point of its own weight. And the key factor here is that if you do go to the moon, and there's only 12 people on the planet that actually know what happens when you're there, and the films are all sequestered in one laboratory run by a guy named Dick Underwood at Houston, who was in charge of the photographic lab there at the Manned Spacecraft Center. It becomes so much easier to censor what you found than to fake that you went. So I've always approached this, that the whole cover story that we never went is really a diversion from what did we really find. And again, I've told the story many times that I was at JPL, I was working for CBS. We had covered Apollo from the North American Rockwell facility down in Downey. We'd built a walk-through solar system. We had a number of very sterling guests. I spent the night looking out those hangar doors with Robert Heinlein, gazing at the moon through the open doors simultaneously while watching on a black and white TV in the corner of the hangar the guys cavorting around on NASA TV. And, well, actually it was on CBS. That experience, to me, is part of the fact that we then moved up the street to Pasadena after a couple of days, and we were at the lab there to cover the flyby of Mars with Mariner 6 and 7. And as part of our mission, we also were still covering Apollo because Apollo 11 was not over. The Apollo 11 astronauts were literally, when we went to JPL, about halfway between Earth and Moon, falling in the command module toward the Earth at an accelerating velocity, ultimately peaking at something like 25,000 miles an hour before they re-entered the atmosphere. I was startled, not to the point of thinking it was totally bonkers, because some weird things used to happen around NASA when I was hanging around there, but I was really startled to see the NASA public affairs officials squiring a guy around that press room at JPL the week of Apollo, the week when the astronauts are still not home yet, handing out little pamphlets saying to all the press, we never went to the moon, it's all being faked on a soundstage in Nevada.
I heard you saying that the other night.
Square that with what Jay said tonight, and to a lesser extent what Stanton said tonight. To me, it looks like a huge setup to divert people from asking, what did you find, to did you go?
And that's the main point tonight. Someone went to a lot of expense to gin up smoke and mirrors to obscure something. It's just a matter now of figuring out what the something is. And you or one of the callers earlier raised the notion of the astronauts who did go having their minds sort of blanked out. You know, there are two primary moments in life when most people are fully awake, fully present, fully aware. That's in the moment of sex, and also in the moment of getting run over by a bus or getting held up by a guy on the street. Mm-hmm. You remember and retain all sorts of data about those moments, okay?
Yep.
So how did these guys get their minds blanked out, and
exactly.
why? The magic question is why.
Well, to me, let's back into it. The why is because of stuff they saw, stuff they picked up, stuff they brought back. That was the whole reason for Apollo. I go into this in great detail in Dark Mission, that Apollo had basically a secret mission, which was go to the moon, find engineering artifacts, maybe find records, find a library, although the odds on that were very small, and bring it back to Earth to A, validate that the moon, A, once had habitation, and B, to try to back engineer the technology. I mean, if you look on the imagery we've analyzed and put up on enterprisemission.com from the Apollo 17 landing site, there is a thing, an object in a crater that we know the astronauts visited because we got tons of pictures of them, exploring all around it. It's called Shorty Crater. And in the bottom of that crater, there is something that looks exactly like C-3PO out of Star Wars. It looks like the head of a dislocated robot with the rest of the body missing, and the head just lying there in the sun with the eyes and the mouth and the skull configuration, and everything looks like it's some kind of a robotic device, including a color strip across the chin that looks like it was color-coded. Like those robots with that color, it was red, do this function. Those colors with blue do something else. In other words, if the astronauts actually brought something like that home and we've spent the last 50 years trying to talk to it, to turn it on. Was it AI? Was it a real artificial intelligence, a real robot? Is this like something out of one of Isaac Asimov's novels? In other words, there's so much about Apollo based on the data that we see that in no way would have been faked, because there's no reason to fake data if you're trying to cover up that you went to a place where the data would come from. I mean, that's kind of circular logic and a total tautology. No, the idea that I have, the approach we've taken in our investigation is that, in fact, we went to the moon, we raced the Russians to get to the good stuff, we brought it back, it was part of the big Cold War thing. We basically then discontinued going to the moon or anywhere out there because part of the mission was not to tell the American people or the world what's really out there. And all the space programs have been collaborating together to suppress the real data. That's why the Russians never blew the whistle on the most outrageous ideas, because they got part of the goods. They got some of the swag. They got under the table, a la, Khrushchev and Kennedy agreeing just before they're both Kennedy's killed and Khrushchev is put in house arrest, to go to the moon together to share what we found. So I believe, yes, the world has been regaled with an incredible mixture of fact and fiction that would outdo any film. But when we get to the bottom of it, it's going to blow even people who think they know what's going on mind, because it is so complex, because it's designed to keep us forever imprisoned, not knowing who we really are.
Do you think, this makes me think of Apollo 13, do you think there was something at that landing site that required a mission to be sabotaged midway so that they would never get there to see it?
No, because Apollo 14 landed at the same from or a landing site, and that's the one that Mitchell was on. And,
Highlands.
And remember him saying artfully to Jay's friend, Jamie Foxx, well, we maybe faked a few things. Wink, wink.
Yeah,
which of course would be that he's now been read in, and even if he doesn't remember what originally happened, he now knows that something happened, and he's basically just standing and waiting to see who breaks cover. By the way, one of the things we can do with this program, if you're in NASA, if you worked on Apollo, if you know what really happened, and you want to call us totally anonymous, so no one will ever find out who you are, where you are, unless you give clues, which of course you're not going to do, you could call this program from anywhere on the planet, because Skype can bounce you around the world 3 times, and you could come in and talk to us and let us know what of all these speculations is true, what is not true, what is a mixture of true and not true. In other words, if we have real whistleblowers who are as tired as the rest of us of not knowing what really happened in the most, as Art said, epical historical moment in modern history, then you can help by calling in anonymously and telling us the truth.
Okay, well, I'm going to go, and I thank
Scott,
you for taking my call. And by the way, Dick Bertel, the show with him was thoroughly enjoyable. Get him on again. He was amazing.
The only problem with Dick Bertel is he lives in Washington, outside Washington actually.
Yeah.
And our program goes on at 3 a.m. So, and he's not a early morning person. He's not a late night person. So, I have to actually get him ready by taking naps to get, to do this. But I'm hoping that he will become a more permanent voice from Washington, because he's got tons of stuff he can tell us about and cover by simply being there.
It was a fun show. I enjoyed that night tremendously.
I will pass that on to him.
Okay, thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, Scott. Sorry.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And let's go to our next call. You're on the air.
Yes, my name is Joey.
Hi, Joey.
Yes, and I'd like to know.
Oh, you're talking to me on a terrible cell phone.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
You need to get Skype.
I'd just like to know, Richard, why people that call ask about UFO Diaries being called one of those people? And also, that explains it. You hit it on the head. You know why? You had your mind tinkered with. You don't remember that original sunset, that Cydonia sunset, the opening line that you helped create. They wiped your memory.
I think we're going to move on. Thanks for calling.
Why?
And we'll go to our next call. Hello?
Yeah, hi, Richard. Thanks for taking my call. I just listened to Art's show, and now I'm listening to yours about the whole moon debate. And I was wondering if you would mind if I could just give my opinion of what I think the whole cover-up might be about.
Oh, absolutely. That's what look, open lines, you can talk about anything. If you want to talk about the moon, talk about that, talk about... I want to actually shift the conversation toward the end of the show to something else, but we'll talk about what you want to talk about. So what do you want to talk about?
Okay, here's what I think. And I've started writing books and making movies on this. I live in Los Angeles, California, and I worked in the intelligence community for 13 years, and I saw for firsthand that our enemies are not really our enemies as far as democratic countries, communist countries, socialist countries. There's a fixes in on the entire planet. I think the New World Order is already in place and operating, and I think that the nature of reality is so far off from what we've been educated by government standard education that this is just a smokescreen and a cover story to make us look for these. We're trying to figure out if UFOs, what they are, who's piloting them, why are they here. I think, honestly, some of it might be government technology, a lot of it might be holographic images, and that we could, and I don't know for a fact, but we might be living in a huge, let's say, planetarium where the skies are just a light show that is controlled by some device, and we might live on a vast plane and not even a globe that just goes off in different directions. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, I think we're being deceived every which way. I don't trust the United States corporation. I don't trust any of their departments. I don't believe anything that a president tells us. He's just a guy who signs paperwork for a corporation because that's what a guy who's president does of a corporation. And that's all that the United States is. And they've taken their police power and military power, sequestered all of the information they've been gathering over the years, all of the technology that they have, and they're keeping it for themselves in deep underground military bases like the one under Denver International Airport. And I know for firsthand that place does exist because the structural engineer who built that helped my friend Larry Hall build survivalcondo.com, which is in a retired SA-7 missile silo in Kansas. That is an underground bunker to help survive. He built out to withstand, maybe an asteroid impact.
But what does this have to do with Apollo?
That the entire space mission, the way we've been shown it in the media, is a big fraud, and that they've got technology far beyond that.
Well, wait a minute, though. Wait.
The moon might not even be real.
Wait a minute. Well, then you have to ask yourself, how come you've got a match between the Chinese imagery and the Apollo imagery separated by 50 years?
Because I think these countries aren't really enemies; they're working together.
But why would they? Why would you put clandestine ruins in imagery and never talk about them? And they have to be found by people like us. I mean, that seems to...
I don't know. Who knows where they even took those pictures? It might not be on a moon. It might be in the middle of a desert somewhere with special effects. I just watched.
Yeah, but see, you're ignoring the question. Why would you put extraneous ruins in fake imagery? Since that's the one thing... I mean, NASA for decades has totally ignored what we've been saying and totally protested that we're not correct. I mean, even people like Mitchell say, Hoagland can't possibly be correct. I didn't see anything. But then he says to Art that he can't remember what he saw. In other words, Mitchell says he can't remember being on the moon, but he's so certain that I can't be right. So there's an interesting paradox there.
Well, can't remember, that quote gives you basically plausible deniability to say anything that you want.
Totally.
And maybe it's just more disinformation, and those are constructed runes or some fake imagery just to make us think that they might even be trying to hide something. If we think that they're trying to hide information from us and we keep looking down the wrong alley for that information we think they're hiding, we'll never get to the truth.
Well, I think if you keep looking at something and you keep picking at the scab, that's the danger. Why can't we just go into NASA JPL or NSA and say, turn over your information to us? We're sick of this game that you're playing with us all, hiding all the information from us, not giving it to the people. We pay for this information. I don't understand how the Or we simply put together missions and go ourselves. That's why I'm so excited about Elon Musk. Elon is so close to giving us the moon with human beings, certainly in terms of lunar orbit. And if you put unfettered human beings with live, social media links back to Earth, and they're hooked to TV cameras looking down from orbit, and you see all these ruins, it's going to be kind of hard for anybody to keep the secret and the genie basically back in the box.
I agree, and I look forward to that happening so we can learn the truth from civilians who aren't being controlled by military and police power and corruption. And Richard, I appreciate what you and Order are doing. I'm glad you guys came back on Dark Matter Network, and I'm going to keep listening, and I've switched over now that Art's back and you're doing what you're doing. So keep up the good work. I'm going to keep searching. You keep searching. I just think it's really inhumane that the United States Corporation and the global military-industrial complex is hiding the truth from us.
Well, just one final thought. I believe you're right up until the present, but I see a trend curve that there may be changes coming. And I hope so. It's the changes. Well, we don't have time tonight to go into all the evidence, but over the next couple of weeks, we'll have some guests on to talk about evidence that, in fact, the cover-up is about to end. And on that note,
about what?
It's about to end, the cover-up.
Oh, good.
So, Thank you for calling, and by all means, call again.
All right, Richard. You have a good night.
You too. And you are on the other side of midnight. Hello?
Yes, hello, Richard. Congratulations on your new show.
Well, thank you.
First-time caller. I'm a long-time listener.
And your first name is?
This is Ryan out in Buckeye, Arizona, Sonora Desert.
Gorgeous desert.
Oh, yes. Very nice, but very hot.
So what can we do for you this morning?
Yes, sir. One of the very haunting images of your Dark Mission book was the Badge Men, the chapter on Kennedy assassination, and that's one of the things that stuck with me about Kennedy being killed by the Badge Men. And I'm thinking to myself that the last true president that we had was JFK. Because you look at the last several presidents and look at the direction of the country, and you see the decline of this country. And one of the things that really brings me down, because I'm only, I'm a lot younger than you. I'm 39, and is we got trillions for war and death and destruction, but we had to have the Russians to send us to space. I just want to get your take on the Kennedy assassination, and do you believe that it was the CIA that killed him, or because I know that he was trying to work with the Soviet Union to go to to work in space and to I just it's very troubling that what happened to him, and I'm doing a lot of research and studying on Kennedy, and I really feel like he was our last true president. Because you look at the field today, you look at people are infatuated with the politics, with Trump. I don't know why, because you can listen to AM radio and hear him basically say what AM radio says. It just, one-liners, it's just zingers. It's nothing of substance. You look at the presidential field. I mean, we have a Bush and a Clinton again. Really, out of 320 million people. I mean, this is the best we can do. Yeah. And you look at this country right now. We have, I think, 1 out of 16 children go to sleep hungry at night. We have education in decline, like in Arizona. The education is dismal. It's one of the worst. Yeah, we're spending trillions in war. We just spent $3 billion to bomb ISIS, who we helped create the whole Iraq fiasco. And it's like, you look at the government as a whole, it's psychotic. It's just schizophrenic. I thought Obama would turn things around, but at the end of the day, it's like, how is he any better than Bush? on some social issues. But I just want to get your take on the state of affairs of the presidential succession from Kennedy to now. This is very important, because I thought President Obama would definitely turn things in a better direction. I'm disappointed with the space program under him, and I really, I voted for him twice. I really thought, okay, this is somebody who, I believe, when he ran for president and he was going to do what he was, he was going to do what he would say. And then you look at what's happening right now, and it's like we're just going in the same direction, economically, educationally, and there's all this money for the war, and yet we're telling people here in the United States, hey, if you're poor, you're hurting, it's your own fault. And the political situation, you look at the two parties, and it's just, you look at from Reagan on down, you've had for years now just two-party system. The whole political system is just bankrupt, it's corrupt, and it's really sad. And I just want to get your take on the space program today and where we're going in the future. Because I know I'm sure you have, younger family members. I have younger family members. I'm going to be honest with you, Richard. I've listened to you for years on Coast to Coast. I really thought it was really wrong what they did to you, how they treated you with the whole bet with George Norrie. And I feel like, hey, bet's a bet. Let you do your show. What's an extra hour going to hurt? And just for them to throw you overboard, I just thought that was pathetic. You're on the show for over 20 years, always a good guest. You always brought it. You always were interesting, entertaining. And like Art says, you have your crowd that likes you, agrees with you, and then you have a crowd that says, you're a nutcase. But the one thing that everybody can agree is that you're interesting, you're fascinating. And I have your book, Monuments to Mars and Dark Mission. I look at them all the time, and I think, it's like, hey, this guy is, the things you talk about, you make everything interesting. You make me want to go outside right now, look at the moon. And I just want to get your take on the current state of affairs.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Can you hang on? Because we're going to go to a break, and then when we come back, you got a lot of questions, and I want to give adequate weight to some of them are really important. So let's do that. Let's take a small break, and then when we come back on the other side, we will pick up with our conversation of Did We Go to the Moon on the Other Side of Midnight. And we are back on the other side. Ryan, you asked so many interesting questions. There's obviously no time tonight to answer all of them, but let me hit a couple of the high spots. I believe Kennedy wanted to go to the moon, not to just beat the Russians, because if you wanted just to beat the Russians, why did you turn around later and invite them to go with us? He saw it as a way of changing the game by introducing us to a whole new level of knowledge about our ancestors, about who had been here before us, who had lived and occupied this solar system, and certainly the moon before us. And he wanted to do it. At the end of his life, he made the proposal to Khrushchev, and Khrushchev accepted, and then they murdered him. I believe if that had taken place, if we had gone to the moon together with the Russians, his plan was to reveal what it was we really found on the moon, which would, of course, change entire history. It would be fun someday to try to plot out where history would be different if that event had taken place the way we know from his speeches, and we know from Sorensen's book, and we know from the UN presentation in September of '63, and we know from Khrushchev's son. We have all this correlating information that Kennedy was trying to get Khrushchev to go together and to reveal what happened together. So everything that's happened since then, I believe, if I look at the big picture of history, was designed to derail that objective, that basic agenda, which would ultimately have liberated the human species, the human race. in so many ways, culturally, religiously, technologically, and that did not happen. Kennedy was killed, and there was a huge cover-up, and there's been, zillions of books written, pro and con and all this. Everything that's happened since has been a weird distortion of the history that we should have been living through. Then we come to Obama. One of the things that I was so intrigued about with Obama, and the reason that I made the bet with George, and I think the reason I won, was I used this physics, this new perspective of looking at things, and I tried to apply it politically to the presidency of the first black president to run and potentially, possibly succeed. And that's how I won the bet with George, because obviously Obama was elected and you voted for him twice. Well, I voted for him twice. Why? Because I still think in this last year and a half there could be some astonishing, amazing, transformative things coming out of the Obama administration. Let me give you a major clue. We have had a incredible, and you mentioned it in your questions, we've had an incredible concerted and focused push to keep us at a war footing ever since 2001. We now live in that Orwellian society of perpetual war. And when we come to a break in the road where we can make a different decision about not going to war, about actually negotiating, actually reaching agreements that can be enforced and can be managed and will benefit everybody, including our antagonists, the guy who's doing that, the guy who's trying to keep us from World War III, is Barack Obama. And the attack he's getting from the right, from the crazies, from the people who basically want to bomb Iran, they have completely forgotten that most of the history of the United States is not going to war, preemptive war or whatever, against everybody and anybody. It's negotiating deals that can be enforced to keep a peace, even if it's a somewhat fractured peace, because in this day and age, compared to previous eras, compared to the 50s or 40s or 30s or whatever, we have so many abilities to reach into their society and to basically eavesdrop on what's going on once they let us in by treaty. Do any of these people who are arguing against the treaty think that the NSA is not going to be there in full force? I mean, if they're monitoring every phone call of every American, what the hell are they doing about the Iranians? And legally,
the NSA has been, the NSA has been monitoring phone calls for 20 plus years now.
Yeah, going back to good old Project Echelon and all that, which was, by the way, in a 1981 Omni magazine, which Robin still has here, and every once in a while shows me that she was right all those years ago that they were doing this. That was long before we met. Anyway, my bottom line is this. We've got about a year and a half left of this administration. We've got stunning things happening left and right on the NASA front. There are images of amazing architecture and artifacts and ruins and ET presence out there all through the NASA archives, the ESA archives, the Japanese space program archives, the Chinese program archives now. All it will take is one match. All it will take is one official looking into the camera with evidence on a big screen and saying, my fellow Americans, this is the reality we've been trying to verify for the last half century. This is what I can tell you tonight. And I think there is a shot, there's a possibility that that's going to happen before this administration ends its watch on January 20th, 2016. And in future shows, we will flesh out the data that supports this contention, and we've got some pretty interesting clues that not everything that's going to happen is being telegraphed, and there are surprises, some really astonishing surprises, which could change everything up ahead. And the reason that I think this guy is the guy that might do it is because he is holding out against extraordinary opposition to keep us from going to another war. When was the last time an American president said to the American people, I'm not going to take you into war?
Well, I agree with you, but the thing where President Obama lost me personally was the Syria stuff, with Assad, with now this constant bombing. It's like, are we going to have another Middle Eastern war? I understand what you're saying, but to me, it's like,
well, the way I'm looking at, of course, people are the incredible, horrible tragedy of Syria, but in a sense, the options that the president was faced with was either giving huge amounts of money and arms to the rebels, whoever they are, and because it's so weird and conflicted over there, we don't know who the people are we want to give weapons to, because they could turn out to be people that are ultimately going to use them against us. And then you have
McCain about that.
and then you have the situation that if you put people on the ground, you wind up with Iraq too. That obviously did not work. Yeah. That was the biggest debacle of modern history. We've created so many enemies by trying to bring democracy to a culture which obviously didn't want it, certainly not imposed from outside with an invasion. And so you basically have a presidency where how do you mop up from a catastrophe left by the previous guys? How do you save the situation and navigate through? To me, what's going on now appears to be a holding action to keep things kind of like at the status quo until something bigger that will change everything is basically revealed. And that's what I think we're aiming toward, and we'll see whether it happens by the end of 2016.
I agree with you, Richard, but it's like how many more people over there have to die? Iraqis, Syrians, Turks. I mean, people are being massacred.
And can we do anything about it? Can we, by putting a lot of human beings, the American Army, the Marines, on the ground, can we do anything about it? Did we do anything positive?
I'm 100% against that.
Well,
I think what's happened is this escalation of the. I think since April last year, it's $3 billion spent on bombing. And to me, I'm thinking to myself, I look at the kids at school and I see the kids running around. I think of the Syrian kids and Iraqi kids. I'm thinking to myself, what are they thinking over there? And it's like, I understand in a way why they think the way they do about America, but the vast majority of Americans do not support this. Everybody wants to live in peace. Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, people who, the indigenous people over here who worship the sun and the moon, Mother Earth. People. I'm just like somebody who's younger. That's why I called you tonight, because I wanted to get your take on the current state of affairs in 2015. I'm very worried, and I look at all these presidential candidates. Now, one of the few people are actually talking about the issues, about equal pay, about job package for the grid, for the infrastructure, for the environment. It's Bernie Sanders, but he's laughed off the stage. He's the only person that I see that's talking about some of the issues.
Yeah, except have you seen Ryan the latest poll numbers on Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire? He is neck and neck. He is within the margin of error. They are two horses.
He's moving up.
He's neck and neck with Hillary. Hillary is falling like a streamlined anvil, and Bernie, bless him, who's talking about important, interesting issues, is coming up very hard on the inside. Now, on Friday morning, the morning after the big Republican debate, we're going to have a panel here, and we're going to talk about the political process. We're going to talk about the debates. We're going to talk about Trump. We're going to talk about what's happening on both sides. We're going to talk about the bigger context that this election is taking place in basically in front of. And if you want to join us on Friday morning, I certainly would welcome you, because you're raising the issues that we need to stand back and ask of all of these people now, under the theory, under the assumption that the guy or gal we're going to elect actually can do something about the situation. And I have serious questions about whether anyone we now elect by themselves, without a mandate, without a constituency behind them, can make any effective change. Because as you said, we went through the whole Obama thing, and it's obvious that there were other factors behind the scenes calling the shots.
But, you know, if we continue to have the same people in Congress, because what good is a president who wants to make big changes and actually represent the people if you have a Congress that represents the Koch brothers, the billionaires, the trillionaires, the war machine, the pharmaceutical industry, the GMOs? The President of the United States could only sign executive orders.
That's right.
And I have a message to my friends about, you know, the guns. You know, I'm a gun owner. I don't look at Obama as a threat taking guns. And this Jade Helm stuff in Texas. I mean, to me, it's like...
It's all distraction.
Last time I checked...
It's all distraction.
Yeah, last time I checked, Texas was part of the Union still, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, although the governor
Richard,
tonight...
I have to...
With the governor of Texas being downgraded, or the former governor being downgraded in the debate, so he's sitting at the kiddie table as opposed to the real debate. In other words, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this election process for what it is, which is, it's almost like a weird, bad version of Saturday Night Live. It doesn't feel real.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like the fate of 300 plus million people plus the planet is at stake, and it is. And we'll get into that on Friday morning. And I thank you for the call, and I want to give some other people a shot here. So,
good night, Richard. Thank you.
And thank you. And
God
let's
bless.
pick up on Robert. You were on the air.
I am just sort of curious about a couple things, Richard.
Just a couple?
Yeah. Actually,
we only have 45 minutes, so maybe we can just handle a couple. Go ahead.
All right. So first off, I'm from Wisconsin, and I just wanted to say props from Bill Gabb.
Oh, thanks. And your first name is?
Robert.
Robert, okay.
Yeah. I'm curious about sort of what you say about models about things, because you tend to say that a lot of stuff that you do is you're making a model about this, that, or the other thing.
Which means, hang on, which means if new information comes in and the model is wrong, you know, I'm totally willing to change. Because that's what science is supposed to be. So show me evidence that is contrary to the things that I've laid out, and I will certainly take a careful look. Like, I'm looking very carefully at Jay's model, which is that we did go to the moon with secret technology, but all of the Apollo data was faked. And to me, that's an untenable position because my evidence says drastically differently, that in fact the Apollo imagery is real. There may be some fake images in with the real ones, but most of the imagery is real. And if you've ever gone, as I've gone, through the archives and look at picture after picture after picture after picture, they're not perfectly composed. They're not perfectly shot. They're not perfectly, framed. They're all over the map. And what the PR people in NASA did for the images that Jay was talking about is they put up all the really cool ones. And maybe if Stanton's correct that his source said that they've tinkered with some of the images, they may have moved rocks here and put in sun there and changed shadows so that we had the best view of what the moon landings look like. But that doesn't mean that they didn't actually take place and there's not real data on the real imagery, which again the Chinese have now brilliantly, stunningly verified in a way that's so through the back door. I mean, who would imagine the Chinese would verify the most outrageous aspect of Apollo, which is they found ancient glass ruins on the moon?
Well, actually, I totally agree with you about the Apollo landings being real. I think that you actually do an excellent job about disproving some of the crazy moon hoax landing conspiracy stuff. But actually, you brought up my second question, which is about the Chinese stuff. Now, my understanding is that all of the pictures that you're getting from the Chang'e or U-2 lander from the Chinese military website and their JPEG images, and I'm wondering if you've been able to come across any of the original raw images, because JPEG can add a lot of compression artifacts.
Yeah, well, it depends on the degree of compression, but no, we've actually got TIFFs. We have uncompressed
but
images.
Even TIFFs, you can make JPEGs into TIFFs, as
but then you'll
really crappy.
But then you'll see the JPEG artifacts. In other words, when you look at the actual data, you can see if an image has been compressed or not. And the stuff we're seeing is so far above compression artifacts, which are small imperfections. If you magnify a digital image, you'll get eventually down to the compression artifacts. What we're seeing in these Chinese images is so far above the level of artifacts that even if they'd been hopelessly compressed, it wouldn't conceal what's there.
Well, I actually disagree with you on that. Like, you're seeing pixel levels of like maybe 10 out of 255, which is...
Have you seen the pictures?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have.
Go to Enterprise, go to what the Chinese really found, click on that, scroll down to some of these images, particularly the glass curtains, which
I'm saying I've seen them. I mean, they're on your website. I've read your article.
And you're saying those are compression artifacts.
I think they look a lot like compression artifacts or like noise.
You are
noise in the image. I mean, they're very, very low light levels.
You are totally wrong. All right? Sorry, you're just wrong.
But have you been able to find any other images other than these Chinese images or your scans of the Apollo images? Like, for example, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter wide-angle or narrow-angle camera, they take these oblique views, and you can see the sky, and you can see...
Yeah, but what they're doing is they're blocking out the sky, Robert. They don't let you see. They don't let you see what's above the horizon. That's what's so amazing about the Chinese imagery. It looks exactly like the Apollo artifacts photographed on film, which went through a long laboratory process of development and then scanning. And the two, separated by half a century, are identical in terms of geometry.
Well, but Richard, I think that you're not quite understanding what I'm asking. So you have the Apollo images, which some people, I know that you completely disagree, some people have argued you're looking at noise from your scanner or something.
They're idiots.
Well,
they're totally no. There are some things critics say that they're totally stupid.
Well,
hang on. You asked the question.
No,
the idea that I would put negatives or prints on a scanner and A, not clean the screen, and B, not make sure there was no dust on the negative, et cetera, is ludicrous.
Okay,
that is a straw man that people are putting out there that's not true. These are real artifacts recorded by the Apollo astronauts both in orbit and from the surface, and all we've done is take that data and subject it to modern technology to bring it out and to present it in terms of web posts.
Okay, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm saying some people say that you're using these Apollo images, and that is one explanation that your critics make, and then another.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's right. Well, no. They can claim anything. It doesn't mean it. Look, you can hold these photographs up to the light and see it on the analog. Hang on. You don't have to scan it. Now, I can't share an analog image with you because you're not here in the same room.
Right.
So I have to scan it and put it on the web. But the originals show what we're showing. All you have to do in the darkroom is basically bring out the low-level light detail from the negative, and bingo, there it is on an analog print in a chemical bath.
Okay, but I'm not asking about that. I'm saying...
You're saying it's noise. It's not noise.
That you have two sets of images separated by 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Apollo scans, and you have the Chinese images.
Well, no, we have the Apollo negatives and prints. The scan
is but they weren't actually Apollo negatives. They were positives that were then made into negatives. But that's a separate issue. I'm saying that
it depends on how many. It depends on how many generations.
By 50 years.
Robert,
and that your critics have an explanation.
Robert, let me talk. Thank you. It depends on how many generations, because the originals were Ektachrome positives that have to be made into an internegative in order to make PR copy to send to magazines, newspapers, whatever. So the originals were shot on a reversal film called Ektachrome, and it was developed, the actual film the astronauts took to the moon was developed by a friend of mine at a very famous company called EG&G up in Boston, the company that was in charge of photographing all of America's nuclear tests. His name was Charlie Wyckoff. Charlie developed a special color Ektachrome film which had 10,000 to 1 straight line latitude. Film latitude is measured by the brightest and the dimmest objects that you can photograph in the same scene without over or underexposing either one. Normal color film is about 10 to 1. Charlie's film, which he made for Kodak, they set up a special lab to produce this film for the Apollo missions in secret, took this stunning film, which, by the way, I managed to get samples of and use in various real-world situations, like the first Apollo missions to the moon. I shot the astronauts leaving on the Saturn V on this film, and then ran from Cape Canaveral to Boston by helicopter to get it developed, and then back to CBS in New York and put on the air so that we could see this incredible latitude. What that allows you to do is to see into the deepest shadows and the deepest backlit landscapes or figures or terrain, because it matches the brightness levels, and only where an area is not getting any light at all will it record as black. So if you made internegatives from that original and then made prints from those internegatives, you could create in the darkroom images that look stunningly posed, stunningly well balanced, stunningly well shot, because the film the astronauts were using had such latitude they could just about use any exposure and any shutter speed and it would come out perfect. And nobody knows this technology exists except me and Art Bell, because I told him one night, and Charlie Wyckoff, who's no longer with us, and all the Kodak people who, by the way, at the end of Apollo destroyed this secret lab.
Yeah, well, and many of your listeners also know about it. But that wasn't actually my question. My question is, so you have these two sets of images, the Apollo ones and the Chinese ones, and while you completely disagree with your critics have explanations for them.
No, they don't. They have assertions. They don't have explanations. They make the assertion, oh, that scratches on the scanner.
Okay, there are assertions.
That's an assertion.
You're playing semantics. But
no, I'm not. That's what they claim, and it's not true. Have them prove it. Make them prove that's scratches on the scanner. All they have to do is to take these images, order them. Of course, they can't now because NASA has closed the door. Do you know that NASA will not allow you now to order any analog photographic products from the moon missions at all, ever, anywhere?
I didn't know that, but that's still not my question. My question is, if I can...
But see, that's the original data. If you can't get access to the original data, how can you have a scientific conversation?
That's what I'm going to ask you. Have you looked for the original data in terms of, have you looked at the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter images or the Japanese Kaguya images to see if you can get the original raw images and if they show the features? And you just said original data, but you're then going to Chinese military websites and saying that that's the original data. I just don't understand the disconnect there. I was wondering.
The disconnect is that you can only do what you politically can do. How can I get original data if the Chinese don't make it available? How can I get original data from NASA if they don't make it available? What they make available...
Why do you say that the Chinese data is the evidence for what you're claiming?
Because it's their public representation of their mission to the world. Why would they put fake stuff in their pictures if it's not there? And then never talk about it? Remember,
so
they're not the ones...
The Chinese data is real.
I'm saying the Chinese data is real. Of course it's real. You can measure that it's real.
None of the, but you're saying that then none of the other stuff that's put out is real in terms of Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, Kaguya, or the other Chinese images, or the Indian mission to the moon. All of those images that may not show glass structures in the dark sky, those aren't real.
It all depends on the exposure settings. It all depends on the clipping. If you clip all the low values, it'll go away. If you make an digital copy, let's say, and you adjust the histogram so that all those lower values simply vanish, or you do something really crude like you paint out the sky, or you JPEG the images hopelessly like the Japanese did with the Cayuga mission, you can do all kinds of things to obscure what's there, but the main thing you have to do is to convince people that there is nothing there to obscure. Therefore, you win because politically they'll never accept the data because it can't exist.
You
and that appears to be your position.
Japanese images that aren't JPEG'd, and you can also get the raw Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter images as well that don't show any JPEG artifacts because it's the raw data without any levels clipping, though.
And how do you know those are the originals? How do you know they haven't been carefully, shall we say, creatively enhanced?
So you would expect them to do that to well over 1 million images?
It's not them. It's a computer that does it. Computers don't care how many images they have to go through. They just go through them very quickly. Okay, I think we're going to move on to our next call. I understand your position. You're claiming that these critics may have some valid points, and I'm saying that if they're saying that this is dust on the scanner or the negatives or whatever, they're talking up a tree, because that's the first thing you take care of when you scan a piece of film. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
And let's take our next call. Good morning. Please turn down your radio.
Is this the Richard Hoagland show?
You got me. Please turn down your digital device.
Richard.
I'm here.
Yes, I'm very glad to get hold of you. I'm very glad to hear you. I've kind of missed you on the radio. And I have been wanting to ask you about the face on Mars. I remember it was your book, Monuments on Mars.
Mm-hmm. Monuments of Mars.
Yeah, the original, first edition.
Wow.
And that's when I first saw it, and I was just fascinated, and the pyramids and everything else. And then not long afterwards on that great program, Unsolved Mysteries, Robert Stack, they had an item on the face on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
They had interviews with DiPietro Molinar. And they had the footage of the classic face, but then they mentioned another face on the other side of Mars.
Now, who mentioned another face?
That was on that program on Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh, that old thing, yeah.
And
wait. Hang on. Did you listen to Brandenburg's discussion last night?
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay, John Brandenburg did discover another face away from Cydonia during the independent Mars investigation, and we discussed it at length, but that's not the face that other people are claiming is out there that has never been acknowledged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As far as I know, there's the one at Cydonia, there's the one John found, and I forget the region on Mars where he found it, but it appeared to be kind of, it looked like it was another structure similar in size to the Cydonia face, but those are the only two. Yeah. The only two that I'm aware of. That's not the one you're talking about. I'm talking about the one that Brandenburg found.
That one I'm not familiar with. No, this is the only one that I know of is from that program that was on Unsolved Mysteries, and they did show it, and they did. I'm pretty sure I've got it on old VHS,
mm-hmm.
and they had mentioned that I believe it was on the exact polar opposite side of the planet.
Well,
and they showed it. They showed it in the program, and it had damage. It had been hit by a meteorite.
See, I'm sorry, but I was part. I think I was part of that program. I think they interviewed me, but of course they assembled it totally separate. We weren't part of the production process. Yeah. I remember watching it. I think you may be referring to the face that Brandenburg found as part of our study. And I don't remember offhand where that was, but it was at a much lower level of possibility or credibility than the one at Cydonia. So we never really talked, because there were no independent mathematical connections that would allow you to geometrically prove that it was real.
Yeah.
The thing about Cydonia, which is so different, is you've got all those intricate mathematical linkages between between all the structures. I thank you for the call. We're going to be going to a quick break here, and then when we return on the other side of midnight, we'll pick up with more calls.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Have a good night.
And we are back. We are talking this morning. It was supposed to be kind of open lines, talking about anything, but then Art had Jay Weidner and Stanton Friedman on talking about did we go to the moon? And, I mean, how can I ignore did we go to the moon? So let's take our next call. Oh, before we do that, I want to do two things. One of our listeners has supplied me with the commercial name of the trailer that the astronauts were kept in quarantine, both on the ship and then when they were brought back to Houston. It's an Airstream trailer. And I should remember that because my friend Ken Johnson actually has one. They're these kind of cool-looking 50s aluminum, all shiny aluminum thingies. Anyway, it's called an Airstream. And that was what I wanted to do there. Let me go to the next line here. I think Trey is on the line.
Hi, Richard Breps from Belgab.
Good morning.
I actually had a guest request.
Okay.
I was wondering if you would interview Whitley Strieber. I think you two would have a nice dynamic up here.
We have known each other for decades.
Right.
Decades. Let me pitch it over to him and see what he says.
That'd be great. And also, I've never heard any of your thoughts on the Olympus Mons on Mars.
What thoughts do you want to hear?
If you have any information at all or anything you'd like to talk about, I would love to hear it.
Well, it's the largest volcano in the solar system.
Right.
It's a shield volcano. It rises something like 25 miles into the sky. It literally sticks out into the thin upper atmosphere of Mars that would be basically outer space.
Correct.
It has clouds on it, orographic clouds. When the moisture flows across it with certain wind patterns, you get condensation, you get wind streams, white cirrus clouds behind not only Olympus Mons, but also the three other volcanoes that are sitting on that same ridge, which is called the Tharsis Bulge. The key thing, the thing that, of course, makes everything come together is it's at 19.5. It's 19.5 degrees north latitude, in keeping with the physics of internal planetary geology, which winds up showing us these energy emissions on the surface of all kinds of worlds, all the way now, I can say, from the inner solar system all the way out to Pluto. Because would you like to take a guess at what the latitude and longitude is of the center of the Sputnik Planum, where all those frozen gases, nitrogen and carbon monoxide and methane, are located on Pluto?
I'm going to go 19.5.
And you'd be right.
What about it supporting life? I'd read an older article from, I think, 2009.
Are we talking Mars or are we talking...
Olympus Mons, I thought, might be the most likely.
Why would you think Olympus Mons? It's sticking up into a vacuum, basically.
It's rather odd, but that was some article I had been reading earlier and was curious if you had any opinions on that, which I guess clearly you just answered.
Well, I just don't see any... no, on the slopes of these volcanoes, there are pits, which show that we can look inside, that there's underground cavities, there's probably lava tubes that have collapsed and all that. In those underground protected environments, given a modicum of moisture or heat or energy, you might have some kind of microbial life left over from when Mars was flourishing, but I don't think we're going to find on those volcanoes anything that would be of a technological nature, because all that stuff is located out on the plains in both hemispheres, and we've been seeing it now for decades on the unmanned missions that I was talking about earlier tonight. Is that it?
That's it. Thank you. Good show.
Thank you much.
Open lines more often.
Okay.
Thank you.
Our next call is Adam, who is calling from... Adam?
Hi. I'm calling from Kansas City.
Oh, good old... Dorothy, come on. Your real name is Dorothy, right?
Right.
What do you want to know?
Hey, I was listening the other night, and I missed some of the show. I didn't want to. I had some technical difficulties, but I was listening to, I think it was Dr. Berglund. And the nuclear destruction of Mars.
You mean Brandenburg.
Brandenburg, I'm sorry.
John
yes.
Brandenburg, yes.
I missed some of it. One thing he was saying, and my question mainly is, I actually have two, but my main question is, he was saying it was a low-tech society that was destroyed.
That was his perspective.
Right, and
that is not mine. Emphatically, it's not mine.
Okay, and I had seen some YouTube videos of yours where you had identified some, debris and some items in some of the NASA photographs that, you're saying were pumps or were different, items of a little bit higher technology than one would think of a. So I was wondering, actually, that was my main question, was how you reconcile your beliefs with his, and so I think I've got my answer. The other question I have.
Well, hang on. Let me delve into that a second. I don't think in our discussion I got the feeling that John had not looked at a lot of the more recent imagery, particularly from Curiosity. And when I proposed to him that there may have been various epochs of civilization on Mars, ranging from primitive to advanced, he agreed that was possible. And then I said, what you're looking at as hallmarks of primitive is based on your assessment of the comparison with primitive cultures on this planet, like Egypt, Sumer, the Mayan pyramids, that kind of thing. And if you see the same kind of architecture, the inclination is to assume the civilization is of the same level, the same sophistication. And I said to him, it's probably not. And he agreed that you can't tell a lot from remote sensing. You got to land and you got to actually handle the stuff before you know how sophisticated the culture is.
Okay, which was, his belief that we need to go there.
Yeah, well, we all believe we have to go there.
Yeah. Was there something I missed? Because one of the things I was just curious about is, I don't know that obviously anyone knows why that destruction might have happened, but, they didn't come here, at least recently.
You mean the destruction we're seeing on Mars?
Well, if there was, a nuclear destruction on Mars.
Okay. Remember, John's timeline is very, very different from our reconstructions of what happened around the Cydonia artifacts. Because he's saying that the nuclear data, if you apply the current rules of physics to the nuclear data that we've got from, I think it was the Odyssey mission that did the maps and measured the gamma ray emissions from the surface of Mars, he's thinking from the curves that the dating of that nuclear exchange was on the order of 500 million years.
Right.
Now, that's really a long time before the 65 million years ago that we think that Cydonia and Mars bought it in the same event that destroyed the dinosaurs and blew up a major planet where Mars used to orbit as a moon, etc., etc. So he's looking at something literally at the dawn of the, in our model, the rearrangement of the solar system, which I find really intriguing because if when we land either rovers or human crews and we take soil samples and we subject it to laboratory analysis, we'll be able to get a very accurate number on the kinds of isotopes and their half-lives. So we can validate maybe on the surface if that 500 million year figure is true. If it's not true, if it's an artifact of the process that Mars was exposed to during the destruction of its primary planet 65 million years ago, then all bets are off. You can't apply current scientific techniques to a problem which was created by a science you don't understand. And that's kind of where we are until we get more evidence or samples.
And I did hear some of that. Let me write my question real quick, and I'll be real quick.
We have time.
Why, okay, so what did they, so maybe this is a better question. What did they do to...
They being the Martians?
No, yeah, the Martians. What did they do, and forgive the expression, to piss off the, the aggressors? And then...
How would we know?
Real quick, if I could give a shout out.
Adam, how would we know? We have no access to the libraries. We have no access to the mythology. We have no access to a history. We have no access to anything. We're just looking at stuff on photographs or data, spikes in terms of graph lines of radiation, and we're trying to back engineer what could explain inexplicable physical reality.
Which is a reason we want to go there. Right?
We've got to go to find out from the libraries, which, if we're dealing with an ancient civilization, or civilizations, plural, what we do as human beings, because we have to, is we write things down. And what any other culture that wasn't, let's say into ESP or able to transmit thoughts instantly or whatever, they would have to have something equivalent of writing things down. So I would expect, regardless of who built the stuff we're seeing, there will be libraries, there will be archives, there will be really cool things we can find and decode that will show us, probably including with images, if we figure out their scanning systems. An extraordinary... Can you imagine? We could literally be looking at a legacy that's hundreds of millions of years old in terms of a galactic federation, and maybe these guys were an outpost in this solar system, and then things went to hell. There was a war. They had an internal conflict. Somebody else came by that were real badasses, so Can I say that on radio? I guess I can.
It's intriguing because what did they do wrong, and then how are we at risk?
But see, there's people on this planet that do nothing wrong that get invaded and destroyed and exterminated. Right. So, see, we have huge life lessons. Is this really what life in the galaxy is like? Are there good guys and bad guys, and do good guys take people over, and do bad guys destroy planets, etc.? Or are we dealing with, and this is my inclination based on the data, are we dealing with a civil war? An ancient civil war.
Two very quick things, I promise. Can I give a quick shout out
to
the Paranormal Export? We listen to you every night.
Why not?
I think the other thing is, if we don't know this and this is the reason we want to go back there, then I just want to say that, that's very intriguing. I think I missed some of that the other night, but that's just
see, in future, I've already got part 1 up on enterprisemission.com. If you're really interested in the Mars question as to what happened there, you got to look at all the data. And John has not looked at all the data. He hasn't had time because some of the data is really, really new, coming in from Curiosity, like Niagara. It's a flood of stunning imagery of artifacts. Now, they're dusty. They're kind of presented in bad colors because they've got this red thing going with Mars. But if you clean them up and you look at them in the proper light and you zoom in and you do you use enhancement techniques to remove some of the filtering that NASA puts on the images so you can't see detail, which one of our guys has figured out, you get to see some really astonishing stuff. And if you go to Enterprise, there is a paper there called It Only Takes One White Crow. You will see in that paper some stunning artifacts on Mars that are absolutely irrevocably artificial. But they're big. They're not down on the surface. The next phase of that, part 2, when I get around to doing it, now that we've got some really good data to work with, and a lot of times people say to me, well, why did you do part 2 of this or part 2 of that? It's because we're waiting for NASA to give us the stuff in the archives. And they don't announce it. They don't call attention to it, so you got to go looking and looking and looking, and you have to be patient depending upon the mission and the plans and where the spacecraft is in orbit around the sun and the data links and all that. So sometimes if I were to talk about stuff that I want NASA to put in the archives, maybe they won't put it in the archives, and I've got to have that before I can do a part 2 or a part 3 or in some cases part 7 of an article or a paper series I've been working on for years. So this requires kind of patience to wait till the agency, in their infinite wisdom, or whatever their machinations are behind the scenes, they release stuff that adds to the story. It's almost like they're doing two things. They're telling everybody there's nothing there, and yet what they're doing is they're putting everything in the archive to prove there is something there when it all winds up hitting the fan. And I think that the hitting the fan point is sometime between now and the end of the presidential election in 2016. And that's why we're going to be talking on Friday morning about the debates and the election and the political process and how we might influence it a bit from the outside to get some of what we want, which is more and better access to our data. Did you have anything else, Adam?
No, and I appreciate the show, and I will keep looking because I didn't see some of the things that honestly, that you saw, but some of them are very ambiguous in some of those photos.
Remember,
like they could be.
Remember.
So anyway, I appreciate the show, and thanks for the call. So.
It only takes one. It only takes one. That's what's so important. It only takes one. Anyway, thanks for the call.
All right, thank you.
And let's go to Sean here. We got a few minutes till the end. Sean, good morning.
Yes.
Welcome to the other side of midnight.
This is awesome. Well, let me turn this down.
Yes, please turn down devices. Everybody do that. Get kind of spring-loaded to turn down your radio or your phone or your tablet or whatever you're listening to us on.
Okay.
That must have been a big radio.
No. Well,
so what's up? What do you want to know?
Well,
what do you want to talk about?
I've been listening to you for it seems like forever now.
Uh-oh. That makes me feel really, 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 really old.
And now that I've got you right where I want you, And I'm able to ask these questions that you always left us hanging with Art and with George. My mind is a complete
blank. Oh, great. Hey, folks, write down your question. If you have a question, scribble something down so you're not caught like a Republican candidate tomorrow or Thursday night. Have you thought of anything?
Yeah, actually.
Go for it.
I have a friend of the family who is a nuclear engineer, works with submarines, and I've always wanted to ask her a question, and that was whether or not the nuclear reactors ever fluctuate depending upon where they were on the Earth.
What an interesting question.
And I would imagine that there would be some sort.
You mean she's a power engineer on a nuclear sub?
Yeah.
She's in the Navy, obviously.
Yep.
Okay, so she's posted on these long missions, and you're wondering if, as the sub travels underwater from Station A, Station B, whatever its mission and its duration is supposed to run, if it gets to different latitudes or longitudes at different times, does she observe any fluctuations in the power output of the reactor?
Exactly.
Wow, what an interesting idea. Well,
have
you asked her?
No, I haven't.
Why not?
I haven't had a chance.
When did she get back to the mainland?
And here's the thing: is that she is a.
And we shouldn't say too much about her in case So we'll keep her kind of in the dark. But when you get in touch with her again, you got to ask her.
I will,
because it should be detectable. It shouldn't be a major, thing, but it should be detectable. Have you followed any of the work of Joseph Farrell?
Oh, absolutely. Ever since I can't remember the first time that you mentioned him, but ever since then, I have all of his books, and I think he's so crucial to.
Oh, he really is. Now, in one of his books, he goes into, I forget which book on the physics, he goes into the nuclear test, the American nuclear test in the South Pacific after World War II.
Was it Bravo?
The Bravo, the Mike tests, the Ivy test, whatever. And what he reports is a really fascinating and totally underreported facet of nuclear history, which is that they would project, based on the size of the weapon and the amount of fuel, the amount of deuterium or lithium or any of the other ingredients to make the first hydrogen bombs, they would calculate what they called the yield, how big a bang it would create when they set the thing off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet there are several tests where the yield was so much greater than the calculated explosive force given all the known elements in their nuclear theory that Joseph and I have proposed that, in fact, these weapons have created brief gates into other dimensions where a lot more energy can come flooding through before the gate is closed, meaning before the highest intense part of the nuclear detonation peak passes. Mm-hmm. And these variable yields, when the yield should be mathematically predictable, are one of the hallmarks that there's a lot about nuclear physics that we still don't know, even though all the guys behind the textbooks say, oh, we know almost everything.
Well, now that brings up another question that I had. You were, just a couple shows ago, you were talking about adding the 1 second to the atomic clock.
Mm-hmm.
And you left it right there as far as who it was that you wanted to have on the show.
Unfortunately, I can't have Tom Van Planen on because he unfortunately died of cancer some years ago. But Tom, when I asked him years ago why we had to keep adding these seconds to the atomic clock to keep it in sync with the rotation of the Earth, he was very evasive. I mean, that's the only thing that I can remember where he wouldn't give me a straight answer. And the straight answer is that there is an increasing discrepancy between atomic time and what's called dynamic time, which is the rotation of the planet, as measured by stars through an instrument called a meridian transit, on the grounds of the U.S. Naval Observatory, which is just down the lawn from where the Vice President currently lives, where all Vice Presidents actually live, which is on the grounds of the Naval Observatory there in Washington, D.C. Well, this transit marking of the rotation period of the Earth gets out of sync and has for the last 20, 30 years with the atomic clocks, which are based in Boulder, Colorado. So every once in a while, every couple of years, they will inject or subtract a second, depending upon whether the Earth has gotten out of sync ahead or behind the atomic clocks. And obviously, there's only two possible explanations for this going on. One is the Earth's rotation is changing, and to change by a second in a year would be staggering if that were true. Or the atomic constants that are basically calibrating the atomic clock, the regular frequency precession of events, which is how you mark atomic time by the energy exchanges in the various atoms, either cesium or something else. One of those two, and please keep the radio down, one of those two has got to be changing, or they could both be changing. And we don't have experiments set up yet. I mean, the government doesn't. As far as I know, there's no major institutions like universities or colleges or think tanks or whatever that are doing any experiments to figure out which is changing or if they are both, and then why they would be changing. In our model, it's really simple why they're changing. The background physics is changing because of the modulation of the physics caused by the various orbits and alignments of the members of the solar system, and as they change geometric configuration, they change the energy input. Well, on that note, I'm going to say goodnight to Sean. Call back later. Because
to you, sir.
The show is over. We will meet you again on tomorrow morning between midnight and 2 a.m. Pacific time. And until then, enjoy the rest of The Other Side of Midnight.